Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes and hosted on MMAOddsBreaker.com. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 182 event, which takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada. This podcast is geared towards those of you in the betting MMA community, as well as those of you that are starting to dabble in the fantasy MMA community. So, welcome aboard, and hopefully we can help you make some premier picks. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 5 total bouts. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 58 unfortunately went 0-3 to lose 7.75 units. We lost our underdog plays on Elias Silverio and Antonio Carlos Jr., as well as a parlay that included Jake Collier and Yuta Sasaki. We did win our 1.5 unit free bet, which was a parlay on Desmond Green with Hakran Diaz, however. Back to the present, UFC 182 features an 11-bout card in total and will air on pay-per-view and Fox Sports 1 this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass, we have a women's bantamweight contest between Alexis Dufrain, who is 5-1, and Marion Renault, who is 4-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Dufrain minus 185 with comeback on Renault plus 145. Looking over at the lines at 5dimes.eu right now, it's Dufrain minus 170. The comeback on Renault is plus 150. So line margins tightened up a little bit. Not a ton of action coming in either way on this fight at the sportsbooks thus far. It's kind of tricky out there, so I can understand it. By the way, all lines are courtesy of 5dimes.eu, so check those guys out. But getting right back into the fight. Basically, I mean, this should be a very interesting matchup because you have Dufrain, who has all the hype behind her. She's a Team Quest fighter, a talented prospect, a very physically strong and gifted fighter, going in against Renault, who is a very well-rounded fighter, but at age 37, making her UFC debut. In MMA years, she's still fairly young and has some potential. I mean, if you look at her, she doesn't look like a 37-year-old as far as the way she fights and just her overall skill set and demeanor about her. I mean, she's definitely fights younger than a 37-year-old, but still, you got to kind of point that out because I'm not sure how high her ceiling is really in the UFC at 135. So Dufrain, on the other hand, she lost her UFC debut by controversial unanimous decision to Sarah Moraes, which I think was a very controversial decision because I had Dufrain actually winning that fight. So she could be 1-0, but instead she's coming into her second fight with a loss. But again, she's an up-and-coming prospect. She's well-rounded, powerful, aggressive. She's still developing her overall skill set, needs to prove a little bit on the feet and her cardio issues, of course. But in that last fight, she did have some weight-cutting issues, so I think that led to a lot of that. So I'm expecting a better version of Dufrain to come into this fight. She's not going to have an easy fight, though. A lot of people, I think, realize that because Renault is a very talented, well-rounded fighter in her own right. She's physically strong. She moves well. She seems to have decent fight IQ. Renault's best strength, I think, is on the ground. I mean, she's got decent jiu-jitsu. She looks for takedowns, looks to take the fight to the floor and get top position. If she cannot, even if you put her on her back, she's pretty dangerous as far as her guard work goes. She attacks for submissions, and has decent reversals as well. Standing up, Renault does have a pretty good, boxing game. She's got some serious power in her right hand, so she can be dangerous in all aspects of the game. Unfortunately for her, I just think Dufrain's going to be a little bit too much for her. Dufrain's game is getting the fight to the floor and just kind of grinding you out like a typical, again, Team Quest fighter. And Dufrain, I think, is going to put on a better performance. So Renault, I think her best shot is going to be catching a Dufrain inside the distance, either by submission or maybe possibly KO, and I just don't see it really happening for her. I think Dufrain is going to control the tempo of this fight, even maybe get dominant position enough to land some bombs and finish this fight herself. But if not, I think Dufrain more than likely grinds out a unanimous decision over Renault. So good fight to start off the card. These girls are definitely going to bring it. Looking forward to it, but my official pick is going to be Dufrain.
And I agree. This is definitely Dufrain's fight to lose. She should have won her UFC debut, but she kind of laid and prayed there in top position, and the judges punished her. So she needs to do a little bit more this time around, and I think that she will, because as you mentioned, Renault's coming in at 37 years old, and honestly, the only time she had a loss in her MMA career was she was facing a grappling-focused fighter who took her down a few times. So I disagree that Renault's biggest strength is on the ground. When she is on the ground, she's okay. I mean, she's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but Dufrain should be the better wrestler, should be the physically stronger fighter, and I think Dufrain might even be the better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player if it comes down to it. Now, where I think Renault has the biggest advantage in this fight will be her striking. She has some decent stand-up and some good power, as Nick mentioned. So if she can somehow keep this fight standing and try to work over Dufrain on the feet, she has a chance. But I don't like those odds because I really see Dufrain getting inside, dragging this to the ground, getting top position, and just wearing Renault out. And neither of these girls have a good gas tank, so I don't think conditioning favors either fighter. But in general, conditioning would favor the wrestler because it'll be easier to get takedowns, and it'll be harder to stay standing as both start to fade. So basically for me, Renault has a puncher's chance, and I don't really like it because you don't get a lot of standing TKOs in the women's MMA, especially with 37-year-old school teachers that are transitioning to MMA. I don't think Renault is a good enough prospect to get a win in the UFC, and Dufrain is definitely looking to improve on her last performance. She came in on short notice, was way overweight, just did not have a good performance. And I think with a little more notice, a full training camp, or at least close to a full training camp, and some extra motivation, she's going to come in here and take care of business. So my pick is going to be Alexis Dufrain. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have a very interesting battle between Omari Akhmetov, who is 13-2, taking on Mats Nilsson, who's 11-3-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Akhmetov, minus 135, the comeback on Nilsson, minus 105, and steady action coming in on Akhmetov. He's right now at minus 160, the comeback plus 140 on Nilsson. A tricky fight. Akhmetov is so aggressive and he can be so dangerous at times. I mean, definitely. I think, question marks all over his game though, as far as, defensive efficiencies. I mean, he's flawed so bad. I mean, his strike defense is horrible. I think he's got some cardio concerns and he hasn't really looked good. He's looked awful, thus far in his UFC career, even with his comeback win, in his debut. So he does have a well-rounded skill set, definitely. He's aggressively wild though in all areas, but, he can be tentative at times. That's a weird thing about him. I mean, it's like where he sits back and waits a little bit and is a little tentative and then just explodes and goes nuts and attacks. And that's where the danger comes in for sure. And, he's got enough power and enough, danger, I guess, or aggression that he makes it, hard for people he overwhelms people is what I'm trying to spit out here at times. So it's hard to kind of, defend against his, crazy attacks at times. And even in the submission aspect, he's got a nasty guillotine choke. He's no dummy on the ground, looks for takedowns as well. And he just constantly attacks. But again, he tends to be a little tentative, and that comes with the cardio issues, I think, that he's got, going for him as well. So his defensive flaws bothered me a lot. I think he could be a very good fighter if he was a little bit more technical, and had a little bit better fight IQ. But his aggression at times does definitely work for him. Now, Nilsson, on the other hand, he's dropping to 170. Should be a much better weight class for him. He's a pretty solid fighter. He's a far more technical fighter of the two for sure. He's basically a strong grappling based fighter. He looks for takedowns. He looks for position, and to finish on the ground as well. He looks for subs. So he attacks on the ground offensively. Much better off, of course, from the top position. But on the feet, for being a grappler, Nilsson on the feet also is improving his stand-up game. You could tell he's getting a little bit more confident. He's getting a little bit, cleaner with his, boxing for sure. He's mixing things up well. Even throws some kicks when he has to as well. So there's decent improvement in his stand-up striking skill. He's got pretty quick hands and throws in combinations too, so I do like that about him. He does have a tendency to fade as well as the fight goes on. That's what bothers me, because I think Nilsson in round one, his takedown skill and his takedown ability is pretty solid. I mean, he could get the fight to the ground in more times, in more cases than not. But at the same time, as the fight goes in round two, round three, he struggles a little bit with the takedowns. It doesn't come as smooth for him. But I don't think he's going to have to worry too much here against Akhmetov, because Akhmetov does have a tendency to slow down as well. So what you have here, I think, is going to be a firefight early on. I think Akhmetov's going to come in here swinging wild, trying to take Nilsson's head off. Nilsson's going to be the more technical guy, even though he's more of the grappling-based fighter. I think he can land and do some damage, Akhmetov, on the feet as well. So, man, it's a tough one, because I think both these guys are so, like I said, flawed a little bit. Nilsson's chin is a little bit suspect at times too. But I do think more times than not, he should be the better fighter. He should be the more technical fighter. And I think that there's more of an upside to him, honestly. I think Akhmetov's, with his defensive flaws, there's not as much potential in him. I think he's going to continue to get beat in his career. And Nilsson, if he's matched up correctly, I think he can definitely make some waves in the 170 pound division. So my official pick is actually going to be on the underdog Nilsson. I just think he's a little more technical, just a better overall fighter, and a little bit more dependable. Akhmetov is just a little bit too wild and aggressive for me, and that kind of doesn't bode too well. So my official pick is going to be Nilsson.
And I'm actually going to completely agree on this underdog pick. Akhmetov, looking at him and watching him fight, especially in his 2 octagon appearances, there hasn't been a lot to like. The guy is slow. He is very, very wild and sloppy with his striking. His chin is not good. His striking defense is very poor. Basically, what he has going for him is some decent survival instincts when he's hurt. He shoots in for takedowns, and he can get dominant positions against fighters that don't have a very good ground game. And he has some good power. So while he's super sloppy and wild and all over the place with his striking, if it lands, you could be in trouble. So those are basically the 2 things that I think Akhmetov has going for him in his overall game. But other than that, he is not a very good fighter at all. His UFC debut, he just got slaughtered in the first few minutes, basically got rocked or dropped 3 straight times, and then came back with a fadeaway knockout. And then his next fight, he dropped down to welterweight and got absolutely mauled by Gunnar Nelson. Now, I'll give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt, because Gunnar Nelson's really good. But, man, that was just a beatdown. So this fight against Mats Nilsson, I actually favor Nilsson. You saw Nilsson's UFC debut on relatively short notice against Luke Barnett, and that was at middleweight. So he's also dropping down to the welterweight division here. And he was landing pretty well against Luke Barnett. His striking accuracy was solid. He was effective. It was just he ran out of steam a little bit, and then Barnett cracked him with the head kick and followed up. So overall, I actually thought Nilsson looked a lot better in his UFC debut than Akhmetov even though they lost and won their UFC debuts respectively. Now, Nilsson's dropping down to the welterweight division. It'll be interesting to see how he performs, but he's actually going to be an inch taller than Akhmetov. And he actually comes in, Nilsson does, with pretty accomplished grappling acumen. He was a very good submission wrestler. He has solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu credentials. He won a whole bunch of medals in the Naga tournaments, I believe. So, this guy has some really highly credentialed grappling skills. It'll be interesting to see if he uses them against Akhmetov, because Gunnar Nelson was able to use them very well. So, if he decides to just stand and bang, he's playing with fire, because while Akhmetov is not very good at all on the feet, he does have power, and Nilsson doesn't have a great chin either. So neither of these guys have very good chins. But Nilsson, in my opinion, is the more technical stand-up fighter, and I do favor Nilsson on the ground as well. He has a judo background, so maybe he could drag this fight to the canvas and get top position if he tries. So I actually favor Nilsson. We'll see what happens on fight time, but he has the skills in place to pull this one out, because I just honestly do not think there's a whole lot to love with Akhmetov's fight game. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Evan Dunham, who is 14-6, taking on Rodrigo Damm, who's 12-8. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Dunham minus 350, the comeback on Damm plus 250, and the public has come in. The overall action early on has been on Dunham and is currently at 5 dimes at minus 550. The comeback on Damm is plus 425. So some serious support of a lot of parlay action coming in that way as well. I thought the line was at a fairly decent spot, high enough to keep people off Dunham, but I was mistaken. I mean, people don't have much faith in Damm at this point. And I can understand why. I mean, Damm is getting up there a little bit in age. He hasn't fared all that well. He's had so much potential throughout his career. He's got a good skill set. I mean, he's a stand-up is even improving, but he's more known for his ground game for sure. But he just hasn't kind of ever got over that hump, over that line that, of being with the elite type of fighters. And Dunham, even though he's been on a little bit of a skid, to say the least, he's lost, I believe, 3 in a row, so that's quite a skid. But those have been against top-notch competition, and Dunham he did make it over that hump towards title contention. So he's a quality lightweight, and he's been for a long time. He's a very skilled fighter as well. So this is actually a pretty solid fight, no doubt about it. Dunham is going to have some advantages in this fight, though. He's going to have the height advantage. The pure reach, though, is going to be fairly close, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, Damm might actually have him by an inch or so. But Dunham is a southpaw. Dunham pushes a very high pace. Damm is one of these guys sometimes that likes to kind of sit back and counterpunch. So Dunham's going to be the guy that's kind of controlling the tempo of the fight. Dunham is by far, I think, the better wrestler. Damm has, again, some wrestling and some ground ability too, and he's a better pure BJJ guy. But that being said, Dunham has some sneaky subs in his own right. He's more than aware on the ground. His defense is pretty solid as well. So I don't think there's really a clear area where Damm has an advantage. And for Dunham, it's just his pace, his aggression. He mixes things up better overall. I mean, if you look at it, Rafael Dos Anjos is now in line for a title shot at lightweight, and he had a very competitive decision with that guy. So Dunham has been right there. Just unfortunately for him, his chin has been a little bit suspect. And when he's gotten to that point to get into that title spot, he hasn't come through. But in this case, it's kind of a step down for sure. I mean, if you look at the guys he's fought recently, Barboza, Cerrone, and RDA, Damm is not those guys. So this is a winnable fight for Dunham. I think he's going to rebound and get back on track. The biggest concern, I guess, would be maybe Dunham's chin not holding up, and Damm is improving, like I said, in the stand-up department. He's getting a little bit better. He does have some underrated power as well. He's getting a little bit more confidence. His cardio even seems to be improving a little bit too. So maybe there's a slight chance that Damm catches Dunham with something on the feet, but other than that, I think it's Dunham's fight to win or lose, and he should grind out a clear 29-28, maybe even a 30-27 type of decision. If not, get a late finish, because Damm has a suspect chin as well. So both these guys have been KO'd a few times in their career, and it's possible that happens here as well. But I think my overall pick is going to be Dunham. I think the overall early action is correct.
And while I agree on the Evan Dunham pick, I disagree on a couple things, like Evan Dunham having a bad chin. I think his chin's fine. Like, the only guy that's ever really clean knocked him out or put him away with strikes to the head was Melvin Gillard, and, he just landed a nasty shot early. And, Edson Barboza, that was a body kick, that his chin's fine from that. The Don Cerrone fight was a submission, and then he went to decision against two guys that are just absolute killers in TJ Grant and Rafael Dos Anjos. So I think he's fine in that department. And while Rodrigo Damm has a bit more power than Dunham, I don't think it's like fight-changing power that can put Dunham away, even if he lands something really clean or flush. Like, Damm is actually pretty stiff in his stand-up, so it's unlikely that he's going to really connect heavy on anything. So these guys, Dunham's 33, Damm's 34, they're both definitely on the downside of their career. Dunham was one of those, prospects on the rise a while back when he beat Efrain Escudero, but that was a long time ago. And I think that his decline has been a bit overstated, mainly because you look at the guys he lost to, Barboza, Cerrone, Dos Anjos, TJ Grant, some of those in close fights. I think now that he's taking a huge step down, he's going to be in a much better position to pull off the win. And that's why the line is so crazy. So I completely understand it, especially because just the way Dunham fights, he has the submission background, and that's basically Damm's biggest strength is the ground game. So I don't see Dunham getting in trouble on the canvas against him. And while he's not the most technical striker, Dunham does a good job putting pressure on people, moving forward. He's pretty scrappy. And he is a southpaw, which is a bit awkward to deal with. So, Damm, doesn't have nearly as good a chin as Dunham, in my opinion. He, he's coming off a knockout loss to Ally Quinta. He's going to be the smaller fighter. This is a guy that has competed at featherweight, although, not healthy, fighting at featherweight. And even though Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is his best attribute, he does like to stand and bang, and maybe it's just he doesn't have confidence in his wrestling to get the fight to the ground. And I think it's gonna get punished here against Dunham. Dunham isn't the most powerful guy, but if he accumulates enough damage, he could end up getting a TKO, maybe even a cut stoppage or something, like when he defeated Nick Lentz. So my pick is going to be Evan Dunham. I just think he's the better overall fighter, and he's going to be bigger and stronger than Damm. So he should get this win. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think they're in agreement. I mean, I think the members who are going to be looking at the uber tail of the tape between these two, they're going to see a whole lot of check marks over on Evan Dunham's side. And remember, as you guys pointed out, the difference in competition that these guys are facing, Evan Dunham has been in with some of the best guys in the division. So to have the better stats despite that is pretty impressive. And I think the pace here is going to be very important. When this guy stands, Evan Dunham is launching 20 strike attempts per minute. That is far and away the most of anybody on this card. It's almost double the striking rate of Damm. So this is a big, big difference. Their accuracy is very, very similar. It's actually very close to each other, both jab and power. Dunham probably gets the edge in defense. He's also a southpaw, and he is just going to outwork Rodrigo Damm. So on the feet, I strongly lean towards Dunham. And his wrestling defense is also pretty good. He's got a great takedown defense, 79%. Damm, excellent on the mat, in theory, his pedigree, but his takedown accuracy is only 18%. That is one of the lowest I've ever seen. And against a guy with solid takedown defense, I don't see him getting this to the mat where he needs it to be. So, I think this probably stays standing, and I think Dunham outworks Damm. Maybe he hurts him, probably not. The price is very steep. You certainly can't play him straight up. It's just some risk involved. You never know if he injures himself or gets caught with something. But Dunham should outwork this round to round and maybe even get a finish. But that's probably a long shot. I'm probably leaning towards the over on this one.
Now moving all the way up to the heavyweight division, we have Sean Jordan, who's 16-6, taking on UFC newcomer Jared Cannonier, who's 7-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Jordan minus 175, the comeback on Cannonier plus 135, and early action has been on Jordan. It's minus 230 right now. Cannonier's plus 190. So a lot of people out there don't believe in the newcomer. They believe in Jordan. And you know what? It's hard to blame him because Jordan has all sorts of talent. There's no doubt about that. The guy's been in there with some decent competition. I mean, he's been the guy in the heavyweight division that I think a lot of people see potential in. I mean, he trains at a good camp, obviously, with Jackson's. He's got, the wrestling credentials that he could get the fight to the ground against most people. He can. And even standing up. I mean, he's got some stand-up skill to go along with it, and he's dangerous on the feet. So what you have in Jordan is a pretty solid heavyweight. But the problem with him is definitely his chin. I mean, again, defensively, he's a little flawed. And when he gets hit against solid fighters that have knockout power, he usually goes down. I mean, Mitrione did it to him. Gonzaga did it to him. So that's a little bit scary. And what he's facing against Cannonier is actually a very good striker that has a little bit of power, and can do some damage on the feet for sure. So this is a scary fight for Jordan in a way because, man, I mean, if the fight stays standing and he doesn't land a knockout blow first, there's a good chance Cannonier lands something and possibly knocks Jordan out. So there's the concern there. Cannonier, getting right into him, of course, he's the Alaska Fighting Championship heavyweight champion. So that's something to be said. It's a pretty, I mean, for one of the smaller organizations, it's a respected organization out there for sure. What you get with Cannonier is he's athletic, he's quick, he's powerful for a heavyweight. He's light on his feet. He's got really good boxing. Even mixes in some powerful kicks to go along with it. And he seems to be accurate with his strikes. Wrestling is actually decent. I mean, I don't think he's going to be on level with Jordan here. Jordan's definitely going to have the wrestling advantage in this fight. But he does go for takedowns at times for sure. It seems to have a decent gas tank overall for a big man. It's not too bad, but he's still raw, but has a ton of potential. So Cannonier is one of these guys that I think can definitely win some fights in the UFC heavyweight division. This is a tough matchup for him, but it's a matchup that he could possibly pull out and win here against Jordan. Again, if he's able to, I guess, not let Jordan control the tempo of the fight and actually withstand some of Jordan's power. One of the most impressive striking techniques, in my opinion, from Jordan is that uppercut. He's got a sneaky good uppercut with tons of power that most people can't defend against. So Jordan's definitely going to be throwing that, and Cannonier has to be cautious with that stuff too. But I think Cannonier is going to get his opportunities and possible spots to maybe even finish this fight. So interesting spot. I think that Jordan's just a little bit ahead of him right now. But as far as betting goes, I do think it's a dog or pass situation. I think there might be some value on Cannonier here as an underdog. But as far as a pure pick goes, it's hard to pick against Jordan because he is, again, the more accomplished vet. I actually gained a little bit of respect back for him in his fight against Jack May. Jack May, I know he's not going to get a ton of respect out there, but he's a dangerous fighter. And coming off 2 knockout losses against a fighter like May, it's impressive that Jordan had the willpower and the drive to hang in there and accomplish what he did there as well. So it was a good rebound win for him to get back on track, and I think this is definitely a fight that he can win as well. I'm saying it's a dog or pass situation, but more times than not, I do slightly lean towards Jordan. I think he is the better fighter at this stage, and he's been in there with a better competition as well. So my official pick, slightly lean towards Jordan.
And I'm coming in the same way. I interviewed Jared Cannonier on my Verbal Submission podcast. Seems like a great guy, but there's a lot of facts out there that are actually not true. Like you look up his Sherdog profile or his UFC profile, they say he's 6'3", and he's not. He's 5'11", so he's actually going to come in 1 inch shorter than Sean Jordan. These guys are going to be relatively even in the size department as undersized, stocky heavyweights. Now, Jordan is going to be the better athlete, in my opinion, being an LSU fullback. He can definitely come in there. He's going to be a little more powerful, in my opinion, and he should have the better overall wrestling and top game when he's on the ground. So I do favor Jordan there. Now, where Cannonier could have the advantage is in the striking. He's pretty effective with his stand-up ability. He was the striking coach at his old gym in Alaska, and then for this training camp, he actually flew down to Arizona. He's staying with Lauren Murphy and going to the MMA lab. So he's definitely taking his game to the next level and treating his MMA career seriously now that he's in the UFC. But it might be a little bit too much too soon for him. I mean, you look at some of his recent performances. He went to a 5-round split decision against journeyman Tony Lopez in his last fight. And before that, he beat up a guy that was making his MMA debut. So it's a little tough to get a beat on just how good this guy really is because there's not a lot of film on him. And overall, he hasn't faced the best opposition yet. He did face some decent, at least in terms of Alaska prospects throughout his career, guys with 7-3 records, 8-3, whatever. So, he wasn't completely fighting cans the whole time, but it's really tough to get a beat on exactly how good he really is. So you gotta play it safe here. Sean Jordan actually is a pretty good overall MMA fighter. His biggest weakness, honestly, is his striking defense isn't the greatest and his chin. In terms of one-punch knockout power, if guys have it and they clip him on the chin, he's gonna go out. It happened against the likes of Gabriel Gonzaga, Matt Mitrione, and then earlier in his career as well. So it can be dangerous for him to just stand and bang against Cannonier. But, being a southpaw, he might have a slight edge at some points in the stand-up. But I would not be surprised one bit to see Jordan end up taking this fight to the ground because that is where he's strongest. His ground and pound is very good. His wrestling is pretty above average, especially for a heavyweight. And his top position is solid. And while Cannonier originally trained out of a Gracie Baja gym, the ground game is not his specialty. So I could see Sean Jordan riding out a decision, maybe getting a TKO on the ground in this fight. As long as he stays out of walking into something really heavy from Cannonier on the feet, he should be in a good position. So my pick is going to be Sean Jordan. Now dropping all the way down to the bantamweight division, we have Marcus Brimage, who's 7-3, taking on another UFC newcomer in Cody Garbrandt, who's 5-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Brimage minus 270 to come back on Garbrandt, plus 190, and right now looking over 5 dimes, it's actually Brimage minus 210. The comeback is plus 175. Now, margins have tightened up a little bit, so if you look at the comebacks, only 15 cents difference on plus 190 to plus 175. So not a ton of action coming in on the underdog, but there's definitely more action coming in on Garbrandt. And man, I'll tell you what, I'm impressed because I think Garbrandt is one of these guys making his UFC debut that has some potential for sure. He's 23 years old. And I think in the bantamweight division can make some waves. He's only getting better. He's an Ohio guy, which I'm of course a little bit biased, so I'll throw that out there with the Ohio fighters, of course, being in Ohio and, getting to know some of these guys as well. And Garbrandt though is definitely a talented fighter. I mean, he's a prospect. He now trains with Team Alpha Male, actually. I mean, he was originally, like I said, an Ohio-based fighter, but he has moved his camp to Alpha Male and training with Dillashaw and crew over there with Faber, so he's getting some excellent training. And when he does come to Ohio, he trains with the likes of Stipe Miocic and Jess Guy and crew over there as strong style. So good camps all around him. He's got decent experience, and again, he's another one of these young guns that just keep on improving as time goes by, for sure, by fight. So he's strong, athletic, well-rounded, and constantly, like I said, improving in all areas. He's strong in the clinch. I like that about him as well. He throws nasty knees and elbows, good timing with it, decent fight IQ, and he's got that killer instinct. Good overall kickboxing. He mixes everything up really well. He even goes to the body, which is impressive because I think that's key. A lot of fighters don't really incorporate body shots enough. And at the same time, Garbrandt's also an accomplished wrestler. I mean, he's got decent takedowns, a decent ability to control the fight, good ground and pound to go along with it, and he's got a decent submission game with his chokes as well. So I think he's a big puncher. He's got a lot of potential in all areas of the game, and so he's going to be definitely a threat to most at 135, no doubt about it. And I even like the fact that Garbrandt, even though he's an aggressive type of fighter, again, he looks to counter, and he's very effective and accurate with his counter shots as well. So a lot of good things going for Garbrandt right now, but it's going to be a tough debut, man. Brimage is definitely game. I mean, Brimage has shown that in his last few fights. I mean, that decision loss to Doan was controversial, I think. I think that, honestly, Brimage did enough to pull that fight off. The judges did not agree, but it was a close enough fight where you could see the judges messing that up. And against, obviously Conor McGregor didn't fare too well for him, but that was at a higher weight class. It kind of just was huge compared to, Brimage there. So you can't really base too much on that. I think this is a different weight class, different, feel for Brimage. And again, against Doan, he looked pretty good. And against Torsten in his last fight, that head kick was a thing of beauty. So Brimage has some skill. He's hard to take down. He's a southpaw, so that makes it a little bit interesting on the feet as well. And another fighter, I mean, that's constantly improving his overall game. Brimage is definitely getting more confident. He's been in there with some quality competition, and been in there with some solid wrestlers, some solid takedown artists, solid grapplers. He's managed to do okay. And I think you gotta credit Brimage because since the Ultimate Fighter show, I mean, he's improved by leaps and bounds for sure. And it's work, it's dedication, his desire to get better and be in the mix here. So this is gonna be a great fight, no doubt about it. I think it's honestly a toss-up type of fight. I could see Brimage, finding ways to win this fight, and I could see Garbrandt actually making his UFC debut successfully. Garbrandt's gonna be a little bit taller than Brimage, so he's gonna have some advantages in that aspect of the game as well. Maybe in the clinch is going to benefit him a little bit more as well. And he's probably going to look to get this fight to the floor. So I think it's going to be a close enough fight that I'm actually going to slightly lean towards the Rook, Garbrandt, to make a successful UFC debut here. And at the current price around plus 175, there could very well obviously be some value on that side as well, because I do think it's a toss up with maybe a slight lean towards Brimage. So all the little guys that are coming in on Garbrandt early on, I think are probably on the right track, honestly, but can't count Brimage out again. From fight to fight, he seems to get better. He's the more experienced veteran in this spot here, and he's going to be game. So this is going to be a great fight, probably one of the fight of the night contenders for sure. But I'm going to go with the Ohio guy with the underdog pick here in Garbrandt.
And I actually agree. Garbrandt is a pretty talented overall fighter, and this is a very stiff test for him making his UFC debut. But he did all the right things on his way to get to the UFC. He moved out to Team Alpha Male before he switched to pro. He took on a lot of really good prospects on the local regional scene, beat up some really good fighters on his way up the ladder to get here. And he has been doing it convincingly. Every single fight he has won by knockout or TKO in the first 6 minutes. So the guy is an absolute talent. He had, I believe, 35 amateur boxing matches where he went 34-1. His amateur career was pretty rock solid and lengthy as well in MMA. So this guy has done all the right steps on his way up the ladder to get to the UFC. And he is a pretty overall solid fighter. His boxing is fantastic. He has some good power with both hands. He's started to use his knees more when he gets inside. And when he senses blood or when he smells blood, he pounces and you're in big trouble. So this kid has all the tools to have the stand-up to hang with a lot of the best in the UFC bantamweight division. He also has a pretty solid overall wrestling game that he likes to mix in with his combination so he can gain top position. Submissions still have a way to go, and there's a couple other things that, are definitely that he needs to work on defensively, but he definitely has all the tools in place to be a future stud in the UFC bantamweight division. A couple things I would work on if I was Garbrandt. His conditioning might need a little work. He was knocked out in one of his only amateur fights that went to the third round. And his chin, he needs to be a little bit better with his defense because he can get clipped. So definitely sometimes he stands in the pocket a little too willingly and trades aggressively. So he needs to be a little more cautious in that department, in my opinion, as well. So those would definitely be some things I'd work on, especially against a guy like Brimage, who's super dangerous. Brimage has some good power, trains out of a great gym as well with ATT, and since dropping down to the bantamweight division, he's looked terrific. I mean, the fight against Dunham, he looked really good. I thought he won, and he definitely won that fight against Turshin, clipping him with that head kick and flatlining him. He looked absolutely spectacular there. A couple things though with Brimage, his ground game is nearly non-existent, so if Garbrandt wants to mix it up and make this a full mixed martial arts fight, that could be to his advantage. Brimage does have above average takedown defense, so it won't be easy to drag him to the canvas. And Brimage is starting to diversify his offensive attack. He's not just looking to stand and trade punches. His kicks were by far his most effective weapon in his last fight. So that'll be very interesting because Garbrandt isn't a big kicker, so he's going to have to be cautious there. But I mean, you look at Garbrandt, this guy trains day in and day out with the likes of TJ Dillashaw, Uriah Faber, Joseph Benavidez, Lance Palmer, just a ton of really, really talented young team alpha male fighters. And I think the sky's the limit with him. So we're going to see how he performs. And while Brimage has looked pretty good, we also have seen Brimage at his absolute worst, like when he welcomed another guy making his UFC debut with a lot of hype in Conor McGregor, when he got absolutely destroyed. I'm not saying Cody Garbrandt's the next Conor McGregor, but he has the potential to be an absolute stud at bantamweight. So I'm going to play on that potential. I think that he's been working on his faults, and I think this is Cody Garbrandt's fight to lose as an underdog. So my pick is Cody Garbrandt. Now the final bout on the preliminary card is a lightweight contest featuring Danny Castillo, who's 17-7, taking on undefeated Paul Felder, who is 9-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Castillo minus 210, the comeback on Felder plus 160, and right now looking over at 5 dimes, it's Castillo minus 240, the comeback on Felder plus 200. So early action coming in on Castillo, the proven veteran, I guess, at 155 that's been kind of, again, towards the top of the lightweight division for a while, climbed his way up the ladder towards a title shot, and he's right there. He's got a total skill set that you like to see, honestly, in MMA. Castillo has the wrestling background. He's got good stand-up skill to go along with it. He's got power. He's got decent fight IQ, decent sub-defense overall, too. So Castillo's a very well put together fighter that just unfortunately for him has run across some tough fights. I mean, his last fight against Ferguson, honestly, was another controversial decision. A lot of people thought he should have won that fight. But Barboza was another one actually in his recent loss. But what he's had problems with the most, Castillo, is that chin. That chin's let him down a little bit too much, and being controlled and out-grappled by some accomplished guys like Jacob Falkman. And he's been actually grinded out by some decent wrestlers in the past slightly. So Castillo, even though he has that good offensive wrestling, he can be put on his back and controlled a little bit. So his takedown defense is solid overall, but he does have some flaws in that area. Now, Felder, on the other hand, he has decent wrestling. He's not really known for his wrestling, but he showed in the Sago fight that he's capable of getting top position and doing some good things on the ground as well. But Felder shouldn't be the kind of guy that gives too many fits to Castillo as far as that wrestling weakness that I was just pointing out with Castillo. So I think more than anything else, Castillo is going to have to really be cautious about, diving in for these takedowns and trying to get Felder to the ground, because Felder's pretty decent with his timing as far as throwing knees. His clinch game's pretty solid as well. And I think Felder overall has pretty decent takedown defense. So this is going to be a tough fight for both guys. This is a decent step up in competition for Felder. And I think he's going to be able to bring or survive what Castillo brings, I should say, in this fight, because Felder, he made a pretty impressive debut. Again, Sago really doesn't get the recognition as he should, because he's only a couple fights into his UFC career, but Sago has a decent ability to get the fight to the floor, control people, submit people on the ground as well. He's an underrated fighter, and Felder looked pretty good in that fight, no doubt about it. He's an impressive, aggressive, powerful striker. He's got decent takedown defense, like I just said. Offensively, he's really fun to watch because he's aggressive. He's got big power. He can end fight with his kicks, or his hands, and he's pretty decent on the ground. His defense, and his scrambling ability to get in better positions is pretty impressive. But overall, what my concerns are about Felder is definitely his strike defense. As the fight went on against Sago, he started to fade a little bit. Defensively, he started leaving some openings that you don't really want to see. He was getting hit a little bit, and his cardio again was a little bit of a concern. But again, that fight was on short notice, so I'm expecting, and it was in Felder's UFC debut, so I'm expecting a better version of Felder in this fight. I think his cardio should be a tad bit better, and I think he's going to throw all sorts of problems for Castillo's way, honestly. I think Castillo is going to have to look for the takedowns, and if he's not successful, he's going to have to stand and bang with Felder, which Castillo has enough experience and enough ability to make things interesting on the feet. But I think if it does stay standing, which in most cases, most of this fight should, I think Felder's going to do some damage. And Felder's one of those guys that has enough knockout power to, again, finish off Castillo. So I think if the fight hits the scorecards, it's going to be close enough, but I think Felder is going to probably get the nod. If it does hit the scorecards, maybe another close split decision type of fight, because Castillo is definitely going to have his moments in this fight. But I think it's still, Felder can do enough damage along the way and keep it upright enough that he can probably win a decision. If not, I do think there's a really good chance again that Felder does land that knockout blow, whether it's a kick, whether it's a punch, and end Castillo's night early too. So I think it's a dog or pass situation, and I'm actually going to pick the dog straight out. I was really impressed with Felder, and I expect him to just keep on continuing to get better and better. He is the younger, fresher fighter. Castillo's 35, Felder's 29. He's got youth on his side a little bit as well, so that never hurts. But Castillo's definitely going to be a big step up as far as competition goes, but I think it's one that Felder can really pass. So my official pick is going to be on the underdog Felder.
And I actually completely agree for this one. While Danny Castillo is a solid UFC vet with a lot of fights and a lot of wins, he doesn't have a lot of really big wins. And honestly, Paul Felder presents the type of fighter that can give him a lot of fits. If Castillo cannot take Felder down, he's going to be in a lot of trouble, because Castillo, he spams that overhand right when he's on the feet, and he has some power, but he can dish it out, but he can't take it. He's the type of fighter that, just doesn't have a great chin, and when opponents really start to hit him, he gets in trouble, whether it's TKO or anything worse. So, in my opinion, Castillo absolutely needs to get takedowns to win this fight, and he needs to be active with top position, or he could still lose a decision, because in Felder's last fight against Sago was very aggressive in pursuing the takedown, but Felder was able to stuff most of them. And even when he didn't, he reversed a couple and then did enough off of his back to end up winning the decision. So it's going to be a tough night for Danny Castillo, in my opinion. Felder is a really, really talented striker. And actually, when he got signed to the UFC, he moved out and started training with Donald Cerrone. So he already had a very dynamic striking game and some of the best kicks outside the UFC. And now that he's in there training with Cerrone, he's going to have some improved Muay Thai skills, a little bit of toughness to him. And I think that he's been working on that takedown defense diligently, because it took a drastic leap in his UFC debut against Sago. At one point, he had defended about 10 out of 11 takedown attempts. So the guy definitely is improving in that department big time. Now, Castillo, he is a solid vet, so if he can get to the ground, he likes to go for darce chokes, all kinds of little things. But I just don't know if he's going to be able to get this to the ground and keep it there because Felder's pretty active on the ground. He can reverse positions, and man, when he's on the feet, he is so dynamic and scary. You've really got to watch out for him at every instant because his kicks can come out of nowhere. He doesn't need to set them up. They're very quick and active and accurate. So this fight almost reminds me of the Edson Barboza fight, except in this one, Castillo doesn't have hardly any chance on the feet because Felder's chin is fine. You know, he was able to land that big right hand against Barboza and drop him. That's not going to happen against Felder here. So Felder should absolutely be able to work Castillo over on the feet, and if he's able to keep it up for 2 out of the 3 rounds, he's going to win this fight, and he could absolutely get a finish. So Paul Felder is going to be my pick. Now, kicking off the pay-per-view main card, we have a welterweight contest between Hector Lombard, who is 34-4-1 with 1 no contest, taking on the returning Josh Burkman, who is 27-10. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Lombard minus 505 to come back on Burkman, plus 335. Another spot where early action coming in on Lombard. He is now minus 800 to come back as 550. So not that surprised again. I mean, Lombard, arguably he might be the best welterweight out there. I know that's saying a lot because, man, the performances that Johnny Hendricks and Robbie Lawler had as of late, I mean, it's hard to imagine anybody right now being better than those two guys, but if anybody can make a case for that, it's definitely Hector Lombard. I mean, the guy's a beast. Look what he did to Jake Shields. Nobody ragdolls Jake Shields the way Lombard did. So at 185, he was obviously a talented guy. He was a little bit small for the weight class. I mean, physically he's a beast, no doubt about it, but I mean, as far as height goes, he's a little bit too small, and obviously that Okami fight, kind of showed him that aspect of it as well. But that being said, since he dropped down to 170, he's looked great. I mean, no doubt about it. I think this is the right weight class for him. He's carried his power well. His cardio seems to be okay. That's one of the biggest issues with Lombard in the past has been he tends to slow down a little bit, get a little bit too inactive, and that's always going to be a slight concern with him. But as far as pure power on the feet, the speed, the athleticism, obviously his judo background, his takedowns, his control, his grappling ability. Lombard is a total package, no doubt about it. I mean, he's a finisher in every aspect. He can submit you. He can knock you out. It doesn't hurt that he's a southpaw either, so he matches up, he's a tricky matchup to most people on the feet as well. And then again, on the ground, if he wants to take the fight to the floor, there's not much you can do to stop him, it seems, especially at 170. He's going to be the one that gets in top position. He's going to drop some heavy ground and pound. He's a hard out for most, period, and including Burkman. Unfortunately for Burkman, I have a ton of respect for him. I think what he's accomplished in making it back to the UFC, it says a lot. I mean, because let's not forget, this guy was involved in the Ultimate Fighter shows. He made a nice little run in the UFC at one time, but started, suffering some setbacks, kind of disappeared a little bit, refocused, started fighting on the smaller shows. And I think he's at the best point of his career that he's ever been at because he's taken the sport a lot more serious. He's more mature. We're seeing a more mature Burkman at this point, and his skill level has just peaked, for sure. So Burkman, another very talented fighter, has a lot of power on the feet as well. Underrated stand-up, actually. His guillotine choke is sick, so he's got some submission skill to go along with it. Burkman, a very complete fighter. I mean, he's got some wrestling to go along with it too. Just unfortunately for Burkman, whatever he can do, his best attributes, Lombard just does a little bit better. So in order for Burkman to pull this upset off, he's going to have to probably land something and catch Lombard on the feet, maybe rock him, and again, maybe grab his neck for that guillotine choke, because once it's in, man, it's hard to get to shake Burkman off you. A scenario like that, I think, would be Burkman's path to victory here. Other than that, I don't think it's going to bode too well for him if it hits the scorecards, because Lombard is such a beast. He's going to control the action, the tempo of the fight. He's going to be the guy in top position if it hits the floor. Even on the feet, Lombard has advantages there. So if it hits the scorecards, I see Lombard winning. If it doesn't hit the scorecards, then we see a finish inside, even though Burkman's very tough to finish. I mean, especially as far as knocking him out, the guy has a really solid chin. If anybody can do it, it's a guy like Lombard as well. So again, another spot where I do understand. I think the line's getting a little bit crazy. I mean, Lombard minus 800 over a quality opponent in Burkman. And let's not forget, I mean, Burkman really is a quality opponent. And if he wasn't making his return to the UFC against Lombard, it'd be interesting, because I think Burkman right now at welterweight can make some waves and could win some fights in the UFC. Just unfortunately for him, it's not going to probably be this one. So hard to pick against Lombard here. I think Lombard is a title contender, legit title contender. He could be the future welterweight champion, no doubt about that. He's got that skill set. So my pick is Lombard, and I think, again, another case where all the early action is probably correct on Lombard as well.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I'll keep mine brief because Nick touched on a lot of the key points, but Hector Lombard is definitely one of the scariest guys at 170 pounds. Nobody wants to fight this guy. He's just absolutely nasty. He has insane finishing power with both fists. Being a southpaw doesn't hurt, but he can knock you out with both hands. And his finishing instincts are spectacular. When he has you hurt, he swarms you, and there is no escape. So Hector Lombard, definitely one of the most dangerous guys in the world, pound for pound, in terms of pure finishing power. And that's going to be an interesting dynamic because I don't think Josh Burkman's ever been finished by strikes. He has been submitted a few times, but it's going to be very interesting because we don't see Hector Lombard pull off a lot of submissions anymore. Now, for Burkman, this guy is, as Nick mentioned, fighting at the best he's ever fought in his career, and you saw it during that World Series of Fighting run where he beat John Fitch, Aaron Simpson, Gerald Harris, 3 UFC vets in back-to-back fights. So, very impressive. The one very interesting bit on his record was when he lost the title fight to Steve Carl with that 4th round submission defeat to triangle choke. It was very, very interesting because that fight, a lot of people thought that Burkman was going to win easy because of who he had just defeated, but Burkman slowed down as the fight went on. He had some trouble with the wrestling and he got tired. And that's just not something you can afford to do against Hector Lombard. And his lack of defensive wrestling was exploited there as well. And if for some reason Hector Lombard can't put away Burkman with strikes, we could definitely see Lombard go to the wrestling, go to the judo, get top position because he's very heavy when he's on top. He's not a huge finishing threat on the ground when he's on top of you unless, he's swarming for a finish. But if he gets takedowns, Hector Lombard more just stays on top of you and wins rounds. And that could happen against Burkman if he's having some trouble putting him away. Now, the things that Burkman have really started to improve. When he first was in the UFC, he was more of a wrestler submission guy. But he has actually added a lot to his striking. His leg kicks are definitely better. He has very good power in his right hand. That's actually where he dropped Aaron Simpson, where he blasted Tyler Stinson, where he dropped John Fitch before setting up the submission. And he sets up his right hand pretty well. He does a couple little fakes and then, just pounces in there with the right hook. So Josh Burkman is dangerous. And as Nick mentioned, if it was against anybody else in his UFC debut, I think he'd have a chance. But Hector Lombard is just fighting at a crazy level right now, and the hype is back on his train. So I gotta side with Hector Lombard. I'm not quite convinced he'll get the knockout because Burkman is pretty tough to put away in that department, but I do see Hector Lombard winning. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think the numbers are in strong agreement with both of you guys. I'll have a full-blown matchup on MMAOddsBreaker in detail with the Uber tail of the tape, and I'm calling it one of the most lopsided tails of the tape that I've ever seen. I mean, it is just stacked for Hector Lombard. He has big advantages with his hands. The only time he's come up short was in close split decisions with much longer middleweights that he faced. Now he's at welterweight. He's not at as much of a reach disadvantage, and Burkman just isn't the type of striker that's going to outwork him with a huge amount of pace, as we see in the data. So how does Burkman win? He's probably not going to get this to the ground, and I just think he's going to get hit. He's going to get hit hard at some point, and Lombard is probably going to get a finish eventually. Now, the totals limit is only 1.5 rounds. That's tough to deal with, but all signs point to Lombard as being a justifiable big favorite in this one.
Now, dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Kyoji Horiguchi, who is 14-1, taking on Louis Gaudinot, who is 7-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Horiguchi minus 600 to come back on Gaudinot, plus 400. And right now, if you're looking over at the line at 5 times, it's minus 800 for Horiguchi. Gaudinot is plus 550. So early support coming in on Horiguchi. Man, you can't really blame him. I just think that it's a hard fight for Gaudinot. I think that he's going to have some severe difficulties in this fight, regardless of where the fight takes place. He does have Gaudinot is more of a, striking-based fighter, in my opinion. I know he's got a mean guillotine choke, and if he gets around your neck, he's more than capable of submitting you as well. But more than anything else, training at Tiger Schulman's, that crew is more of a striking-based crew that's evolving into, of course, all aspects of MMA. But still, I think that Gaudinot, his overall skill set is going to be tested here severely by Horiguchi, because Horiguchi is just a stud everywhere. I think at 125, he's a legit, not just a prospect. He's a legit title contender, future title contender. The guy's aggressive. He's powerful on the feet. I think he has an advantage in this fight. I think Horiguchi has an advantage on the ground as far as pure wrestling goes as well. Minus Gaudinot catching him with a guillotine choke, or, kind of getting lucky and just clipping him, I think it's a hard fight for him. I really don't see any aspect where he's better. And I think this is a spot where it's one of those situations where Gaudinot is kind of almost fighting for his job, to keep his job here in the UFC, and Horiguchi's actually just fighting to make his way towards the UFC title and fight Demetrius Johnson. And I think, Mighty Mouse is definitely the man, but that would be an interesting fight. I wouldn't mind to see Horiguchi and Mighty Mouse. That'd be pretty slick. So, that's how good this guy is, Horiguchi, honestly. Again, he's got some vicious body kicks. He's got some good knockout power in his hands. He's got some speed. He's just got everything that you want to see in a fighter. And he's only 24 years old, so he's going to keep on improving. He's going to get more confidence, and we're going to see better things from him on the UFC. I think matchmaking wise, obviously, they kind of are feeding Horiguchi a bone here. I hate to say that, but it's true. It seems to be that way. And of course, the early action and the parlay action that's coming in, I think everybody kind of sees that as well. So Horiguchi, a legit contender, minus a guy that's kind of trying to keep his job in the UFC. Not going to be too good for Gaudinot, I think, in this spot. So my official pick, I'm not going to take too much longer on this fight. I just think it's a mismatch, and Horiguchi should come away with a win.
And I completely agree. This matchup is very interesting because it really feels like UFC wants to showcase a top flyweight contender, and Horiguchi is absolutely one of those guys. Now, we've seen a couple of those really high-level Japanese prospects fail to make a huge impact recently, with Sasaki losing to Issa and then Tanaka losing to Kang earlier in 2014. But in my opinion, Kyoji Horiguchi is the best of all the prospects that came over from Japan, and he's already proven it. He's 3-0 in the UFC. His most recent fight, he looked absolutely terrific, hurting his opponent with a body kick and then finishing him with ground and pound. And he's really showcased that he's more than just a one-trick pony. He has pretty solid striking, that karate base. He can explode forward with power on the feet. And his ground game isn't half bad either. He has some respectable takedowns. His submission defense is pretty solid. So there aren't really a lot of holes in Horiguchi's game. If anything, maybe a high-level wrestler at 125 pounds might be able to take him down and keep him down, but Louis Gaudinot is not a high-level wrestler. Basically, what Gaudinot has going for him is he's pretty scrappy on the feet. He'll hang in there and try to weather storms, and like he did in the John Lineker fight. And his best attribute is probably his guillotine chokes and maybe his submissions, that he can catch opponents snapping when they're trying to be aggressive and turn the tables on them. So it's just not something that I think he'll be able to pull off against Horiguchi. Maybe it'll work against Phil Harris, who is about as low tier in the flyweight division as it is, but against Horiguchi, I don't see him pulling off a submission. I don't see him having much success on the feet. And as you've seen in the past, when Gaudinot gets taken down by guys and people that have good ground and pound, that are big physical fighters, he gets absolutely mauled. It happened in the Johnny Bedford fight. It happened in the Tim Elliott fight. He got punished in both of those fights. And Horiguchi is going to be a little bit bigger, about 2 inches. He'll have a little bit more reach. I think he's going to be a little bit stronger. And we might see a repeat here. This guy hits hard, especially for a flyweight, and I would not be shocked to see Horiguchi put Gaudinot away on a pay-per-view main card here and explode into title contention in the flyweight division. So my pick is going to be Kyoji Horiguchi.
Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Brad Tavares, who is 12-4, taking on Nate Marquardt, who is 36-13-2 overall. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened this fight to pick 'em exactly. Minus 120 either way. And right now the line is minus 135, comeback plus 115, Marquardt being the favorite, so comeback on Tavares plus 115. It's a tricky one. I mean, obviously the early action is coming in on Marquardt. A lot of people are backing Marquardt at this point. He seems to be the popular pick out there as well. I'm not as convinced, I think, as most people. This should be a good fight. And I mean, skill set for skill set, there's no doubt about it. Marquardt is a better fighter. I mean, he's such a well-rounded fighter. He's been in the game for so long. I mean, at 185, obviously he made a title run for a reason because the guy deserved it. I mean, he was one of the elite 185 pounders in the world for a while. He decided to drop down to 170, as we all know, because he thought that would be a better weight class for him, and he'd have some physical advantages there. It just didn't quite work out as well for him. I mean, he fought some guys that could heavy hitters basically with Lombard, Ellenberger, and he ended up getting knocked out in those spots. But that being said, I mean, Marquardt, again, he's got skill in every area. I mean, his stand-up game is legit. He's got good hands, good movement. He's smart. His fight IQ is decent. He's got a good ground game, underrated wrestling at times too. He's got a good submission game, obviously. If you ask James Dufrain, he can tell you about that as well. And he can grind you out. So Marquardt can win most fights in every area. I mean, by knockout, by submission, by decision. And again, he doesn't really, have too many flaws, minus the big one, I think. And a lot of people might argue this as well, but I think his chin is a little bit suspect. He's been rocked. Even fights that he hasn't been exactly knocked out, he's taken some damage, been rocked. And that's always a concern with him. And at 35, whether 185 is a better weight class for him, which I do believe it is, still there's question marks all around that, I think, in my opinion. And you can't really go crazy and trust a guy like Marquardt. I mean, he's definitely not in the prime of his career. I think even though he did look great against Dehuna, no doubt about it, I think that there's still some question marks around Marquardt. And with a fighter like Tavares, it's going to get answered, I think. Tavares, unfortunately for him, he was another one of these guys that, man, I mean, he was climbing up that middleweight ladder surprisingly too, because a lot of us knew that Tavares had some potential. He was young. He was improving in all areas. He had a good training camp behind him. He went on a heck of a winning streak there for a while. Unfortunately for him, that all got derailed, I should say, by Ramiro. And then, man, what a weird kind of fight that Bosch fight was. He was doing really well in that Bosch fight. He got caught and ended up getting finished in the second round. So that was a head scratcher in a way. But I think that Romero fight honestly took its toll on Tavares. So I think in both areas here with both guys, there's some question marks and it's hard to trust either guy. So I'm not very confident as far as pure pick goes. I think Tavares on the feet overall, at this point, he's a little bit further along offensively. Defensively, he's got some flaws, of course, but I think he is the better striker. Slightly. I mean, the stand-up game is definitely going to be close. I think the ground game is going to be, obviously Marquardt is the better jiu-jitsu fighter, the better ground guy overall for sure. But Tavares is not an easy guy to take down. I mean, overall, I think his takedown defense is pretty solid. And he's proven, I mean, even in that Bosch fight, look at his strength alone. I mean, he's not a guy you can easily control or bully around the ring. So Tavares has that going for him as well. And he's going to be game. He needs a win here. He realized that he's coming off a couple losses in a row. And this is a winnable fight for him because I do think that if he doesn't get caught and his chin doesn't let him down, he could possibly do some damage to Marquardt. I know he's not really known for his power. He's only got a few knockouts on his resume, Tavares does, but I don't think, I mean, with the middleweights being in the state of, where they are right now these days, and especially with Marquardt being 35, it's not going to take that much to clip Marquardt's chin. So even a fighter like Tavares that's not really known for his knockout power, he could probably be effective enough to maybe land that knockout shot on Marquardt. So that's what worries me about this fight a little bit, because both these guys really could kind of catch each other and knock each other out here in this spot. But skill set for skill set, there's no doubt. I know Marquardt is the better fighter. I almost want to slightly lean towards him, but it does scare me because everybody's so confident in Marquardt at this point that I'm not sure. I think that this is a true pick'em type of fight. It's a toss-up. If this was in Marquardt's prime, it'd be a no-brainer. I'd be all over Marquardt for sure, and the price would not be a pick'em. But again, going back to it, Marquardt is not in his prime. He's 35 years old, moving back up to the middleweight division. I guess I got a slightly lean towards the youth advantage here with Tavares at being 26. Now that might not come into play here, but I'm going to go against the grain. My pick could very easily change because I've been going kind of back and forth on this. So again, it's another one of those situations where you guys got to check out the staff picks for my official pick after weigh-ins. But as of right now, honestly, I'm going to go against the grain and I'm going to pick Tavares. I think a lot of people are counting him out. He hasn't looked that great in his last 2 fights, but he did show potential, up until those fights. I mean, he showed a lot of potential. He showed a lot of improvement. So I'm going to go with the youth factor, I guess, more than anything else here and see what happens in this fight. But it is a tough one as far as betting goes. Man, I don't know how anybody could realistically be too confident either way. But my official pick as of right now is going to be Tavares.
And I'm going to disagree. The main thing for me is the youth advantage really is only a factor in fights because guys that have been in more wars that are older, they've been knocked out more, the chin is a huge factor, and maybe the athleticism and the speed and quickness. And Tavares has never really been an explosive, quick guy, so I don't think the youth advantage helps him there. And in terms of the chin, I don't think the youth advantage helps him there either because he's never had a very good chin. We've seen him get rocked in a lot of fights, and it's starting to accumulate in some of the more recent ones, especially the most recent Tim Boetsch fight where he looked really strong early, and then he just gets popped with a shot that doesn't even seem that hard, and he just went down and then out. So it's very scary to trust Brad Tavares in any fight at this point because, you know, it's not even big shots that are putting him that put him away. But in terms of skills, Tavares does a lot of things really well. You know, training out of Extreme Couture, he works with Ray Sefo. His technique is excellent. Especially in the clinch. He has mastered the clinch. He is one of the best clinch fighters on the entire UFC roster. His positioning is superb. He grabs underhooks immediately and is able to get the inside position anytime someone initiates a clinch against him. So, you know, that is not something you ever have to worry about with Brad Tavares. He is going to be controlling that position and working to win rounds and do damage there. He throws some good elbows, good knees in the clinch as well. So, I mean, if he could just keep fights in the clinch forever, he'd be very tough to beat. In terms of in open space, his jab is pretty good. He throws it more often than most people. And he does have pretty good footwork, but the big problem for him is he lacks power. He definitely just does not have that ability to put people away on the feet, which is where he likes to keep fights. And he doesn't have a great chin, so he can outstrike people, and all it takes is that one big shot. So that is very scary. Now, Marquardt, as Nick mentioned, 35 years old. That is definitely questionable, especially because his last 2 fights at welterweight, he got finished by strikes in the first round. And that's a big problem. And you even looked at his last fight where he looked great against Tahuna. He did start to get hit a little bit by Tahuna along the fence. So there is potential there for Tavares to take advantage of something. Now, in terms of everything else, Marquardt trains at high altitude, so he's in great shape. He's not going to have any conditioning problems. And he is one of the more diverse strikers on the UFC roster. Against Tahuna, he threw multiple right hands, several head kicks, and then a knee that rocked Tahuna, all in the first 30 seconds of the fight. It must have been about 15 strikes total. The guy definitely can throw out some crazy video game style combos in fights, like just look at his Wilson Govea finish. So he is very, very dangerous at any moment from any angle. And his ground game is no joke either. He has some really solid wrestling, some very good submissions, and when he gets top position, he looks to hurt you with big elbows, big punches. His ground and pound is very good. The biggest problem for him right now is he can be inconsistent. We've seen the guy come out and have incredible performances, look like a world beater in the fights like Damian Maia or the finish against Tyron Woodley or multiple other opportunities, and then he just comes out and he can lay a complete egg, like his fight against Tarek Safadine or the fight against Yushin Okami or the losses against Ellenberger. You know, he's very inconsistent, so it's very tough to trust him. And as Nick mentioned, his chin isn't very good anymore. That's more something that has gotten worse over the years. So I'm not really sure that Brad Tavares is the guy that'll take advantage of that just because he does not have a lot of punching power. But that is something to keep an eye on, especially after this fight. If Marquardt wins and they give him a step up in competition, I'm not sure you can trust him. But I'm going to pick Nate Marquardt. I think that if he keeps this fight in open space or if it goes to the ground, he's going to be winning. And the only place I'm really worried about him is if he gets stuck in the clinch for extended periods of time. So my pick is Nate Marquardt, and I'm not crazy confident about it, but I can definitely see him pulling it off. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, clearly there's a lot of disagreement here in terms of trying to make a firm pick. There's a lot of back and forth I'm hearing, and the stats actually agree with you, especially in the stand-up game. Marquardt is definitely the more skilled fighter. Let's just get that out there. He is an excellent striker. He's amazing on the mat. He's been in the game a long time against some of the best. And so you've got a new school guy like Tavares, who's much younger. He's looked okay, hit or miss, in his fights in the UFC. So it's a bit of a weird matchup, and yet things are pretty close and the market is kind of torn on this one. So, if it stays standing, Marquardt is the more technical striker. He's better. He's more powerful, but you're right. There is, the liability, his age. He's been knocked out a few times. Now, pound for pound, strike for strike, Tavares, his chin is only barely better from a quantitative standpoint. He's been dropped 3 times now. Just hasn't had quite the highlight reel finishes that Marquardt suffered against Lombard and Ellenberger. So it's back and forth. It is close. Tavares does tend to outwork his opponents, and that could be a problem for Marquardt if he gets outpaced. But on the mat, I don't think this is as even. I mean, I think Marquardt definitely has advantages. He's far more skilled and experienced in terms of submissions. We saw that, even when he hurt Tahuna, it was a submission that finished it. Marquardt, I think people are sleeping on the quality of his game, and just there's some recency bias on the knockouts that he suffered. So I'm leaning Marquardt here. I might try to do a more blown out analysis of this one. There is liability, there is risk, there is a low 1.5 round total, because I do think a finish is pretty likely given that both guys have eaten some shots, and they're both going to be swinging for it. I mean, Marquardt really wants to prove himself that he's back. So he should be aggressive and he shouldn't get lulled into a point striking affair, which has been a problem in the past. So I'm leaning Marquardt.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, dropping down to the lightweight division for the co-main event of the evening, we have Donald Cowboy Cerrone, who is 25-6 with 1 no contest, taking on Miles Fury Jury, who is 15-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Cerrone minus 150, the comeback on Jury plus 110. And again, early action coming in on Cerrone. Right now he's minus 200, the comeback on Jury is plus 170. Man, it's hard not to like what Cerrone's accomplished recently. I mean, the guy, another spot where, Donald Cerrone's been at the top of the food chain in the lightweight division for a long time. I mean, on the brink of getting that UFC title shot, and deservingly so. I mean, he's fought the best there is in the division, and he's been successful against most. I mean, he's a finisher. He's got a well-rounded skill set. He's got that killer instinct. He's got cardio. He's got wrestling. I mean, every aspect of the game, Cerrone is game. His fight IQ is fairly decent as well. So you know what you're getting in a guy like Cerrone. I mean, just quality across the board. Unfortunately for him though, he's had some setbacks again in some of those bigger fights, like the fight with RDA. RDA was able to have some success on the feet with Cerrone, and he was able to get top position in that fight as well, and actually grind out a competitive but deserving decision against him. Anthony Pettis was able to, that body kick. I mean, that body kick would have stopped most. So I don't even fault Cerrone there. I mean, that was just brutal. But again, Cerrone did struggle with another tall, lanky type of fighter in Nate Diaz as well, which was a surprise to many at that point. So Cerrone, even though he's this complete, amazing fighter, that's definitely the top tier of the lightweight division, he is beatable. And a guy like Jury, I think, is kind of flying under the radar a little bit. I mean, Jury has a lot of the same things that I just mentioned about Cerrone. You could say the same stuff about Jury. He's just a little bit younger, a little bit fresher, but he has a lot of that skill set. He's got underrated striking. I mean, the guy's a very talented, smart fighter. He's got underrated power to go along with it. The guy definitely has some knockout potential. He's got underrated wrestling. surprisingly good wrestling. In fact, you can ask Michael Johnson about that. And the guy has a good submission game. So you have two fighters that are really close in several areas across the board. I mean, they match up well. This should be one of the fights of the night, no doubt about it. But in my opinion, I think Jury is kind of his fight to win or lose a little bit here. I know that Cerrone, again, is the more proven veteran. He's been in with a better competition. But I think this is the coming out party for Jury. This is that marquee win that he's going to need to get over, to get on his resume, to maybe put himself into that upper tier of low lightweights and consider him for title contention as well. And I think he could do it. I think how he gets it done is honestly either in the stand-up game or possibly even on the ground, taking Cerrone to the mat and controlling it there. On the feet, I think Jury is probably going to be looking to counterpunch. He moves well on the feet for sure. But his counterpunching ability is definitely good. And I think that Cerrone, if you looked at his fights, even the fights that he's been successful as of late, he's been rocked several times in those fights. So Cerrone's defense is definitely worst of the two. I mean, Jury, defensively, I think he's a little bit more sound. So that's one flaw, if anything, in this matchup that Cerrone has is I think Jury has the ability to land powerful on him as well. And if Cerrone does get rocked in this fight, I mean, there's the first time for anything. Maybe Jury could be the one that finally gets rid of Cerrone in that aspect of it. But it's going to be a tough task for sure. I just think that Jury, in this stage, I mean, with his wrestling and the flaws that Cerrone has shown in the past by getting taken down at times in certain fights, I think that Jury can kind of follow that same blueprint. He can control the action of the fight. He can land a little bit more damage on the feet. He's going to have to, again, be careful with a fighter like Cerrone, if that's the word to use there, because Cerrone is just great everywhere. I mean, you just don't know what he could knock you out with his kicks. He can knock you out with his hands. He can knock you out with his limbs, any limb, basically, man. I mean, he's got good knees. He's just, those leg kicks that he used against Eddie Alvarez were just phenomenal as well. So Cerrone, a very dangerous game fighter, but I think Jury can get this done. And I think he can control and win a decision here. He can grind out Cerrone a little bit. I think it's not out of the question that Jury does land a damaging enough blow to maybe hop on something and submit Cerrone as well. So there's more ways, I think, for Jury to win this fight, even though they match up really well. It's a close fight. It's basically, in my opinion, it's a pick'em with a slight lean to Cerrone. Basically, from what he's accomplished, what he's proven, who he's been in there with, the harder, the tougher competition. So you got to give the slight edge to Cerrone. But that being said, as far as value goes, I mean, a plus 170 right now, where the line is on Jury at a pick'em fight, it's a dog or pass situation, no doubt about it. So, in my opinion, I'm going to go on a limb and think that the younger, fresher fighter here in Jury is going to get that marquee win on his resume, and I think he does get the job done here.
And I'm going to very, very slightly disagree here. I do think this fight is closer to a pick'em than the betting odds indicate, and this is a matchup of two great gyms battling it out with Jackson's against Alliance. Donald Cerrone, he is so good with his Muay Thai skills. Like, this guy is so dangerous and powerful. He can finish you with any limb. I mean, he has he dropped Edson Barboza, knocked out Melvin Gillard with punches. He can put guys away with head kicks. He can put guys away and win decisions with nasty leg kicks. So he is a very, very diverse and dangerous fighter. And his finish can come at any instant with him. His submission game is spectacular as well. So he has a lot of things going really good for him. But unfortunately, a couple things that are very not going good for him are he is a slow starter. We've seen this time and time and time again. Getting dropped by Dos Anjos in the first round. Getting blasted by Melvin Gillard in the first minute. Getting crushed by Anthony Pettis. Eddie Alvarez just hammered him with those uppercuts in the clinch in their last fight where he won the first round. So he definitely needs to come out with more of a sense of urgency against a young up-and-comer like Jury if he wants to walk away a winner. And Cerrone can be very inconsistent, which can be a problem. Now, Jury, on the other hand, this kid is very well-rounded. At first, he was more of a grappler with a focus on submissions, but his striking has come a very long way. He is extremely technical on the feet. He utilizes his length very well. He has good jabs, good front kicks, a lot of things that he does really well at keeping his distance and using his reach to win and outpoint fighters. He also feints extremely well because his right hand is very dangerous. It has some good power And he sets it up very well with a lot of feints, lulls you to a sense of complacency, and then you just get popped. And that worked against Gomi. It's worked against Ramsey Nijem. He's got some good power. And his ground game is extremely potent as well. But I think it's going to be a bit more of a wash against Cerrone because both these guys are so legit on the canvas. And maybe Jury does a better job of getting top position, so worst comes to worst, he might be able to win some rounds in terms of top position. My biggest problem with Jury, honestly, is the strength of competition. This is a huge step up for him. I don't think he's faced a ranked fighter other than Michael Johnson. That was a big win for him earlier in his career in the UFC, but he hasn't faced anybody on his recent run that is on Cerrone's level in terms of the guys that Cerrone has been fighting. Cerrone's gone in there against Barboza. He's gone in there against Dos Anjos. He's gone in there against Jim Miller, Eddie Alvarez. And Jury on his recent run was more Takanori Gomi, Diego Sanchez. So Mike Ricci. I mean, it's just not that same level of competition. So this is a huge, huge step up for him. There is potential that Jury could pull this off just because he's so young and he's taken way less damage than Cerrone, who's been hurt in a lot of fights. But at this point in their careers, I think the adjustments that Cerrone makes in fights, the way he comes on strong late, even if he does have a slow start, his that just fighting ability that he has, I'm leaning Cerrone maybe 55-45. And so I'm going to pick him, but I don't see any value in betting Cerrone. So my pick is going to be Cerrone, though. So now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I've been big on Cerrone. I mean, I love his fighting style. He's super aggressive, super dangerous, and he's good pretty much everywhere. He's got great striking, and he's dangerous on the mat. That said, Miles Jury, kind of the opposite profile. He's been very conservative, but he has a very clean and efficient fighting style. He doesn't take damage. He's not especially dangerous and aggressive, but he tends to control the position and the pace of the fight. And those two things clashing together here make for a very intriguing matchup because of just the styles of the fighters. But numerically, it also looks pretty good for Jury in terms of winning rounds. Again, Cerrone is aggressive and he's a threat, but that comes at a price. The way he pushes forward, extremely powerful, striking with kicks and punches, and his knockdown rate is phenomenal. He has 13 knockdowns in the WEC and UFC combined, but his defense is terrible. He's actually taking a lot of damage. He's walking forward into strikes. He allows people to hit him. Now, Miles Jury is the opposite. He's got decent accuracy, but now his defense is really what's defining him. He just doesn't take any damage. So I do think he wins the rounds here as long as he doesn't get caught in something. And obviously the strength of competition is, that's different too, as Brad pointed out. So there are some challenges in picking this one, but I do see value on a potential upset play.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a huge light heavyweight title fight between champion Jon Jones, who is 20-1, taking on unbeaten Daniel Cormier, who is 15-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Jones minus 215, the comeback on Cormier plus 165, and since that time, it's all action on DC, and I'm a little bit surprised. But at the same time, I guess it's hard to, count out a guy at the level of just athlete that Cormier is. I mean, his wrestling, what he's accomplished overall. You got essentially here, you got two undefeated, amazing fighters, amazing talents, going at it here. So this is a great fight, a highly anticipated fight, that a lot of us have been waiting for a long time. So I do understand the buzz on Cormier a little bit. I mean, the way he derailed, honestly, Dan Henderson was impressive. I know Dan Henderson is at kind of he's past his prime. He's kind of on the decline a little bit, most would say. But still, I mean, Daniel Cormier, how dominant he was in that fight was really impressive. I mean, his win over Cummings now looks very solid as well, since he dropped down to 205. So, because Cummings has had some success and he's looked pretty good as well. So, I mean, Cormier has a lot of great things about him, and obviously it's his athleticism again, his speed. He's got some power on the feet, but his wrestling, the way he's able to ragdoll people in most cases is what brings him to success. And I think he's going to need to do that against a guy like Jon Jones. I'm just not sure it's going to be easy to do. If you look back at some of Cormier's fights, One to me that stands out the most in the heavyweight division, of course. And again, a lot of the fights that you can really get the best info from Daniel Cormier are actually heavyweight. But at heavyweight, even though he has this marquee wrestling ability and he has had success in that division, with his wrestling against guys like Devin Cole, his wrestling wasn't as effective. And that's a little bit of a surprise. Throughout his fights against a guy like Josh Barnett, he looked great in that fight, of course, too, right? But in the clinch, he had a little bit of problems in that fight as well. Against a guy like Frank Mir, a lot of people were surprised he didn't just blow Frank Mir out a little bit more than he did. And Frank Mir, again, had some success in the clinch in that fight as well. So this is a hard fight for Cormier because I think Jones has decent enough takedown defense. A lot of people are going to point to Gustafsson taking Jones down. Styles make fights, and there's no question about it. Cormier is a much better wrestler than Gustafsson, but I think they match up a little bit differently here, with Jones. So I don't think Jones is going to be as easy to take down as most people think in this case. And if not, it's just a difficult fight for Cormier because if he gets inside on Jones, Jones has an outstanding clinch game. I mean, his knees, his elbow attacks, his very smart fight IQ. He could be very effective from the clinch. So you would think Cormier might want to stay on the outside. Well, with Jones's reach advantage and his ability to outstrike people, that's not a good thing. So you stay on the outside, you get probably picked apart by Jones. You get inside, you're going to get destroyed and probably eat some elbows and knees along the way. So the best path to victory for Cormier is actually getting the takedowns, getting top position, landing some of that nasty ground and pound, and just kind of trying to dominate Jones en route to a unanimous decision win, or even possibly getting position on the ground and beating Jones that way. I just don't think it's going to be that easy. Now, for Jones, on the other hand, I think he can control this fight. He can be more effective in the clinch and, again, on the outside. And even if he doesn't stop Cormier, I think he can definitely sway the judges enough in most rounds that he's going to probably be able to pull off the decision. So if this fight hits the scorecards, I do think that Jones is going to be clear enough that he's going to probably pull off a unanimous decision win over here. If there's a stoppage in this fight, even though Cormier has that explosive speed and power, and he could possibly land on Jones, Jones's chin has been pretty solid. He's been a guy that's taken and absorbed some punishment fairly well. And I think if there's a stoppage in this fight, it's probably going to be Jones possibly knocking out Cormier. Again, maybe possibly in the clinch. I know Jones has been going to decisions a lot more often than people would like to see recently. But that being said, he's about due for a stoppage as well, and none of us are expecting it to happen probably as much so in this fight, but it could. So I think Jones, again, it's another case that I think he's just a step better in most areas. Even the wrestling, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but at a point, if John Jones is able to maybe even try to show off a little bit and prove to everybody that he can get top position on Cormier. I don't know if he's going to accomplish that, but I wouldn't be surprised if he tries or maybe briefly gets some kind of, control over Cormier, but Cormier is going to probably not let that happen. I realize that as well. So, but even in the wrestling department, Jones is not weak in any area of this fight. So he's a champion for a reason. He's been a dominant champion for a reason. He's been the pound for pound #1 fighter for a reason in most people's polls because he is that good. So it's hard to pick against John Jones. I know that everybody thinks there's a live dog in Cormier here, and I could be wrong, but I don't think he is. I think that it's John Jones' fight to win. He has more ways to win this fight again. He's the better fighter, especially at light heavyweight. I think he's the man to beat for a reason, and he's probably going to come away with the win. So now looking at the line, I mean, it keeps on dropping. I think we're going to continue to see it drop for a while. Maybe on fight day, we'll see it spike back up a little bit. But right now out there, it's -165 for Jones, +145 out there for Cormier. There's even some spots that are 155 around that area. So there could very well be some value on Jones. And I think everybody's kind of underestimating John Jones, which is a shocker to me. So my pick is going to be John Jones. I think he's going to retain his strap, and it's going to be an impressive performance.
And I agree. And I also agree about the whole John Jones might want to try to get top position thing. This is a guy that loves to beat his opponents at their own game. I mean, you saw him get a takedown against Chael Sonnen and beat him up from top position. You saw him strike with Glover Teixeira in his last fight. So this is a guy that's not afraid to go into his opponent's strengths just because he has so much confidence in his ability in all areas of mixed martial arts. John Jones is a very, very dangerous fighter. He's the top pound for pound guy in the world for a reason. In this fight, Jones is going to have a significant age advantage. You know, he's 27 to Cormier's 35, so he's going to be much younger, much quicker, and he's 5 inches taller, so it's going to be a lot tougher for Cormier to reach up to him. He's going to have a 12-inch reach advantage, And we already know that Jon Jones is one of the best at using his reach in all of MMA. So if Daniel Cormier cannot get inside, cannot get takedowns, he's going to be in a huge, huge trouble in this fight. And Jon Jones is one of the more diverse strikers in all of MMA. Reed wrote a really nice article that outlined all the ways that Jones attacks all areas: head, body, legs, knees, elbows. He goes at everything when he's fighting. So you gotta be on your guard at all times. I don't think that Jon Jones is going to throw as many kicks as usual in this fight because Cormier is such a great wrestler, but you never know with Jon Jones. He might try something really quick as well. In terms of one factor that does concern me is Jon Jones's hands, is his eye pokes, because now that that's become like a big thing in a lot of his recent fights, the ref is going to be on the lookout for that. And if Jon Jones leaves his hand out to kind of frame Cormier's face and Cormier walks into some fingers, the ref is going to be more likely to not just warn Jones. He might lose some points in this fight due to eye pokes. I would not be shocked. So that is a bit of a concern. And Jones is actually probably at his best when he's actually in the clinch with those elbows, with the knees. But he's going to have to be careful because when you clinch with Daniel Cormier, you are always at the risk of getting taken down. Now, looking at Cormier, trains out of American Kickboxing Academy, 2-time Olympic wrestler, and there are good wrestlers, there are great wrestlers, and then there are the elite wrestlers in the UFC. And Daniel Cormier is definitely one of the elite guys, in my opinion. You looked at some of his recent fights, as Nick mentioned, the Dan Henderson fight. That was an Olympic alternate wrestler that Daniel Cormier was lifting over his head and slamming repeatedly. So just brutal takedowns. He was able to ragdoll Josh Barnett, one of the best catch wrestlers in heavyweight MMA history. So this guy is absolutely legit with his wrestling. The big problem is, will he be able to get inside against Jon Jones? Is he going to be able to penetrate that reach and get in there, get a hold of Jon Jones and get him to the ground and keep him down? It's not easy. Cormier is actually a very good striker, but his striking, he needs to get inside to strike because he does not have a long reach and he doesn't have a huge diverse striking attack with kicks or anything. So he needs to kind of fight in that phone booth. And I don't really see Jon Jones letting him do that, stay in the pocket like that. Jones is going to either want to stay real close and hit him with elbows, or most likely just keep his distance and pick him apart with big jabs and right hands. So it could be very long night for Daniel Cormier if he cannot close the distance repeatedly and either work for takedowns or land some inside shots. Because Cormier has some excellent uppercuts. He's got good power. One big concern is Cormier's hands are pretty brittle. If he connects with a couple good shots and doesn't put Jones away quickly, he could break his hands. And then that would just take away one of his biggest weapons. Also of note, this fight was delayed because Jon Jones suffered a knee injury that did require some, not terribly invasive surgery to his MCL. So he might not be quite as spry and quick as we normally expect. That could be a concern. Obviously, he wouldn't be taking this fight and continuing on if he wasn't healthy enough, if he didn't feel he was healthy enough, but that could also affect things. So keep an eye out for that as well. But all in all, I do think this is Jon Jones' fight to lose. I'm a little surprised that he's become, that so much money's coming in on Cormier, at this point, but Jon Jones is the champ for a reason. He's beat the who's who of the light heavyweight division, and I think he continues the good times. So my pick is Jon Jones. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, it's weird. We have an extreme mismatch physically, but we actually have almost identical performance characteristics. So that was a big shocker when I look at Daniel Cormier's performance stats. He's basically performed almost as impressively as Jon Jones has, and he's done it despite being really at a huge reach disadvantage in most of his fights. Now, I did go back and I looked at the actual numbers there. It's not as bad as I expected. Daniel Cormier is very short for his division, definitely at heavyweight, still at light heavyweight. His reach is actually considered average or slightly below average if he was a welterweight. So this guy is definitely short-ranged. And then on the opposite side, you've got Jon Jones' longest reach in MMA history. So it's an extreme situation there. And yet Daniel Cormier has gotten it done against bigger guys. He's knocked people out who were bigger than he was. He's thrown them around. He's managed to close range. But the difference is that Jon Jones is not going to be striking like Bigfoot Silva is, or Josh Barnett. He is far more technical, accurate, unorthodox, and he uses his range very effectively. It's not just that he's longer. He uses his jab. He uses all these diverse attacks, and he makes it count, and he looks very impressive in doing so. He controls the fight, stays off his back, only been taken down once, and that was very briefly. So he still has a good takedown defense game, and Cormier is going to be battling uphill against that. So I don't see either man getting finished. I definitely see it going to the cards, and I just think Jones's style is more impressive, and that range is just too much to overcome. I'll believe it when I see it. Cormier is certainly talented. He's performed admirably, and he deserves to be in the top ranks. But again, I'll believe it when I see it once someone dethrones Jon Jones. I don't think it's going to be someone of Cormier's size.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 182. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member. And if you'd like to be an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member, you can sign up at a discount right now. Just go to MMAOddsBreaker.com and check the top right corner. We have a big holiday sale, so check it out. I believe the sale will be ending following the beginning of UFC 182, so time is limited in that department. Now, if we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of all free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.